Welcome to the Work Done Right podcast, where we talk with industry professionals to discuss best practices in construction, manufacturing, and maintenance. I am your host, Wes Edmiston, Director of Product with Cumulus Digital Systems and 15-year construction industry veteran. Today's guest is Matt Kleiman, the co-founder and CEO of Cumulus Digital Systems, a connected worker platform that ensures mission-critical work across all areas of construction is done right the first time, every time. Prior to founding Cumulus, Matt spearheaded technology and innovation programs at the oil and gas giant Shell and the aerospace engineering think tank Draper. Most recently, his work on reducing leaks in industrial facilities was recognized and published in a technical paper, which was presented at the renowned Gas Tech Conference in 2022. In addition to all of that, Matt is also my boss. So today I will take pleasure in having him in the hot seat, answering all of the questions. Matt, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Wes. Glad to be here, and we'll talk about this in your review.
You know, we've known each other for quite some time now, and I've kind of been a little bit captivated by the fact, let's see, you have your law degree from Duke, right?
That's right.
Then you worked in aerospace, you worked oil and gas, and now you work in construction technology. Can you tell us a little bit about how it is that you kind of made that transition into where you are and what led to the founding of Cumulus?
Well, Wes, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And so that's generally what I'm trying to do.
Aren't we all?
No, it seems like a circuitous route, but it actually, in hindsight, kind of made a lot of sense and had a plan. So I've always been an aerospace junkie, and I went to space camp 3 times when I was a kid. I got my pilot's license when I was 17. So I've loved aircraft, aviation, aerospace for as long as I can remember. And but I went to law school for a variety of reasons, and not too long after I graduated, I had the opportunity to land my dream job, which was to go back into the aerospace world, initially in a legal role, but that quickly evolved into a commercial and program management role. And I left the law behind. So that was that transition. And then in 2010, right after the Deepwater Horizon disaster, a number of energy companies came to the company where I was working called Draper Laboratory. And at Draper, we were experts in guidance and control systems for aircraft and spacecraft. And the energy companies wanted to learn how the aerospace industry builds and operates aircraft so safely, and what the oil and gas industry can learn so that something like the Deepwater Horizon didn't happen again. And I was working in this arm's length way with a number of energy companies, both contractors and operators, for about 2 years. And one of our customers at the time, which was Shell, came to myself and the other person who I was leading the program with and said, you know, this is great what we're doing, but if we really want to make a difference in the industry, we have to bring it inside. You have to open the kimono, so to speak, and go inside so that people feel a lot more comfortable really, opening up and finding opportunities for change and improvement. So I was hired by Shell in late 2012 to start an organization in Boston that we ultimately called Shell TechWorks, which had that purpose to bring in capabilities from critical industries like aerospace, like biomedical, like robotics, and improve from the inside how large capital projects are built and then ultimately operated after construction is completed. So that was the transition to Shell, and that's really where I really dove into construction because from one of the earliest days inside of Shell, I was leading projects focused on improving safety, productivity, and efficiency in capital construction projects. And one thing led to another. We identified the opportunity for Cumulus, realized that in order to recognize Cumulus's full potential, this had to be built outside of Shell. Shell's a great company, but it's not a software company, and we really needed to bring in outside capital and the right talent who could build and scale a product like Cumulus.
The thing that's interesting to me with that is that this kind of like this entire construction tech revolution all kicked off in response to something like Deepwater Horizon. Is that a trend that you're still seeing where, customers are coming out and looking for new innovations in response to incident, or people being more proactive these days?
Unfortunately, yes, it's still largely reactive. It is construction, heavy industry, even aerospace are all relatively conservative industries. And they're conservative for good reason because when there's a mistake, it's not like a software app having a mistake or, a photo app or something like that. When there's a mistake made, when someone makes an incorrect decision, there are real consequences, and those could be safety, it could be environmental, it could be financial. Oftentimes, it's all three. So people can get hurt. So this conservative culture has developed over many, many years, but unfortunately, that sometimes works against the industry as much as it works for it. So the catalyst for change is unfortunately when something bad happens, some sort of accident or incident. Now that is changing a little bit. I would say, especially as a younger generation is coming into the workforce and expecting to be able to use more modern tools and capabilities in their work in their everyday jobs. COVID also had a major catalyzing effect in making people more comfortable with digital technologies than they were before. So it is getting better than when I first started, 10, 15 years ago, but it's still a largely reactive and unfortunately not as fast moving as some people would like.
Now, how does that compare? You're with an organization like Draper, right? That is involved in all things aerospace and aviation, right? How does that reactive mentality line up against an organization like Draper? Are they, in that industry, are they still very much reactive, or is this a kind of, uniquely characteristic thing to construction and construction personnel?
There is an element of being reactive. The one advantage that we had in the aerospace world is that the government provided a lot of funding for cutting edge, leading edge research, whether military, NASA, whatever it might be, that funded all kinds of new programs. Now, to get those programs into production and operation took years and years and years by no means, but there was this forcing function of the military coming in and saying we need to be the best in the world, we need to have the most advanced capabilities in the world, and you just don't see that in construction, so to speak, at least in the United States. Interestingly, there are a couple of programs in some other countries that at least I'm aware of. So the UK, for example, where the government has said we are going to fund innovation in construction because we need to get better. And that's had some of the same effect, but certainly not to the scale as you see in the aerospace world.
That makes sense. So you were having those instances where, say, yeah, it took a while to affect some of that change and input some of those modifications that were made with those discoveries, but you were still light years ahead of it just due to the amount of capital investment from the government earlier on. Yeah, that makes sense.
And a structure where there's a willingness to take risk, to do something new, and permission to fail because you take a risk, it might not work, and that has to be okay. That as part of the culture. That's also something we don't see in construction and heavy industry is the willingness to take risk in the sense that hey, this might not work out, and you of course don't want to take risk where human safety is in play, but you do want to take risks that hey, we're going to adopt something new, try something new. It might not work like we expect. And as long as you've taken care of the safety risks, that should be okay and accepted, and people shouldn't feel like their career is at risk when that happens.
Yeah, I chuckle a little bit, honestly, just thinking back about a few of my experiences. I was blessed to have a lot of very good managers over the years, but there were also a few that were a little more scrutinous and we'll say they didn't have as high of a level of risk tolerance whenever it came to trying new things as what others do, right? They didn't have that same level of appreciation of innovation. But no, you're absolutely right. It is definitely an area that's ripe for change, and especially whenever you're looking at just generally the amount of investment that's going on into infrastructure right now because of how pivotal it is and the point that we're in. We're definitely in a position where we need that investment directed toward how is it that we can not only just build things but build them better. During your time at Draper, a lot of the innovations you were working on surrounded, kind of the commercial space business. And you're also someone who is passionate about learning about things in space in your free time. Are there any strengths and innovations in the space industry, like things that they do really well beyond, securing additional government funding that might translate well into industrial construction?
I think NASA is one of the most valuable brands in the world, and that certainly helped. But in all seriousness, uh, we were actually, and we by the folks who I recruited to come with us into Shell from the aerospace world, we were pleasantly surprised how similar the technical challenges were in aerospace and in some of the most difficult operations in oil and gas, so operating in deep water, in terms of operating in challenging, hostile environments where mistakes can unfortunately lead to death or environmental impact. So you had to think about designing and building these structures differently than you might something that's operating in a different environment. But one thing that aerospace does very differently than oil and gas is something called systems thinking and systems engineering. It's thinking of an aircraft or a spacecraft as a complete, almost living organism and understanding exactly how something happening in one system of a spacecraft can cascade first, second, third order effects into all other systems of an aircraft and spacecraft. One of the first times that we used it was in response to Deepwater Horizon. One of the main failure points of the Deepwater Horizon was the blowout preventer, and it turns out that there have been failures both in the operation of the blowout preventer and the design of the blowout preventer, and also the power systems of that blowout preventer that prevented it from properly closing and severing the pipe during that disaster. When we were looking at it, as I mentioned earlier, a number of energy companies had come to the company I worked for, Draper, and then we also built out Shell TechWorks after I joined Shell, all looking at this problem of blowout preventers, using a systems thinking approach, really designing from first principles. How should a blowout preventer be that's operating in a very deep water environment? How should that operate? How should it be closed? How could you think about where you place the battery packs, the communication systems, all the things that had resulted in a cascade of failures during that disaster? How do you, through engineering, prevent that from being able to happen again? And that has now become part of standard BOP design for new models from a number of different of the manufacturers.
And, even thinking about it beyond just kind of oil and gas, the operating facilities, because we do have a good amount of safeguards as prescribed by, we'll say, ASME and other agencies out there, effectively, other organizations. But even thinking about that same kind of systems level thinking whenever we're talking about construction projects or maintenance, right? Just thinking about the way that the entirety of the site operates and assuring that all of the inputs aren't going to work toward the detriment of one of the other inputs. It's really interesting to consider it that way. So obviously aerospace, aviation, they are on the fore of innovation and technologies, and they have that culture of accepting innovation. That's what drives them forward, and they know it. But you're working in an industry that is still kind of in the Stone Ages whenever it comes to all things digitalization. What are some of the challenges that you've seen trying to deploy a technology in kind of previously uncharted waters?
A few different things. One, and I would say, as a first part of the response, that while construction certainly lags digitalization in some other industries, it is advanced quite significantly, even in the 15 years that I've been part of it from where it was before. So it has definitely played a lot of catch up, and there's a much more general recognition, even in more conservative organizations, that things have to change. That and a lot of it, as I said before, is COVID driven, but more than just COVID, it's the labor shortage that COVID exacerbated. It wasn't so much the work from home and everybody be on Zoom. It was just there was a labor shortage. There was a labor issue before COVID that became exacerbated by the economic conditions during and after COVID. And I think that more than anything is driving change in the industry. But that being said, it's still a relatively conservative industry. There aren't these internal structures within construction companies, whether they're owners or contractors or GCs, to take in innovation and then replicate it at scale. So you see a lot of pilots, and there's something we've talked about called pilot purgatory, where new technology just stays as a pilot. Everybody gets excited about pilots and talks about the issues cool videos and press releases. Look at this technology we piloted, and then there's nobody to hand it off to say, now take this and scale it up within the organization so that it's used everywhere. And that just largely doesn't exist within the construction industry. And until that does, new technologies are going to stay in that pilot purgatory and have a very difficult time scaling and becoming just standard part of standard operating procedure. That's the biggest thing that I think is missing. And then you just have general issues with bureaucracy, with people who are paying for the technology, not being too disconnected from the people in the field who are using the technology. That leads to questionable decision making at times. But I think the most important thing the industry can do is build those scaling mechanisms and not settle for a pilot being a victory. That's just not acceptable.
Hey, real quick, this is Wes. I just wanted to let you know that if you have an idea for an episode topic or a great guest suggestion, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email at workdoneright@cumulusds.com. Now, back to the show. Now there is a lot more digitalization in the industry than there was, honestly, even 3 or 4 years ago. I remember whenever I first started seeing this stuff come up, I think it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there was nothing else in the industry whatsoever. And everything was just kind of like shock and awe factor almost. But even now with these innovations managers and other similar roles, it almost feels like to me that they're tasked with identifying potential solutions, but not necessarily implementing them. They're kind of still handcuffed, and no ill will against them. It's really just looking at the situation. They're a little bit timid toward the idea of saying, no, you shall deploy this on a project, because there's a lot of potential risk involved for them. They don't know who's going to be using this. They don't know if it's going to be deployed correctly or not. So that's where it makes sense that you end up in this position where you end up in what you call pilot purgatory.
The pilot purgatory. And also innovation managers, they might be given a small budget that could do nothing more than pilot something. But when it comes time to scale, frankly, they need an operating budget that they don't have, and they need buy-in from the business lines that have those operating budgets, and that's where things end up falling through the cracks, so to speak.
There's definitely room in order to connect some of these gaps together and make this go a lot easier. But I think that's one of those all in due time that we're going to continue to learn from these experiences and what technologies will and will not survive. So if you could, going back to your experience in aerospace, if you could summarize that experience into one actionable lesson that the construction industry could take away from our conversation and from your experience, what would it be?
Sure. I would say two things. I know you said one, but I'm going to give you two.
It's a bonus. That's great.
Exactly. One is the concept of systems engineering. It is so powerful. We've seen the power of it, bringing it into capital construction projects where we've been able to implement it. And making that part of corporate strategy, corporate culture, technology strategy within these construction companies is critically important, and will yield very significant benefits in really helping with decision making. Two is what we were just talking about earlier, which is not to inadvertently incentivize pilots as being a win. Pilots are simply a step along the way to implementation, and the full structure to implement a technology at scale has to be part of a technology strategy. It's not going to happen by itself.
There needs to be a sense of urgency around that idea of if we're going to meet our digitalization initiatives as well, we can't allow the momentum to end whenever we come off of these pilots. To pivot just a little bit, thinking about again back to your experience, you went, from a law type background, moved into aerospace, went into a company like Shell, and then you went into a startup environment. Was that a big shift, and what's it like working in a startup as compared to some of these multinational corporations?
Sure. Well, it is night and day different. Uh, and you can spend hours talking about it. I'll pick up a few things, but first, I would say I am very glad I had that period of learning and growth during my career in different kinds of organizations. I think, especially in an industry like construction or heavy industry or even aerospace, someone coming out right out of college and trying to build a company in this space is going to have a really hard time. There's a lot that I learned, and I know folks on our team learned through their experience over the years working in different companies and different industries that build on itself, build on it, and you bring to a startup like Cumulus. So I wouldn't advise somebody, hey, go right to doing a startup if that's your very first work experience, at least if you're focusing on construction. Maybe in some other areas that makes more sense. But the big difference is in a large organization, there's structure there for better and worse. For better, it's because the organization's been around for a long time. For worse is that sometimes the structure gets in the way of change. It could be both a benefit and a curse. But there is structure, and you have to navigate your way through that structure, even if you're in a position where you're trying to bring change to an organization. It's change within a certain structure, within certain expectations, and that has benefits and drawbacks. In a startup, there is no answer. There are no answers to the test. You have to build it from scratch. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. You have to figure it out. Be willing to pivot. Be willing to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 2 steps back, 1 step forward until you find your new way. But you have to be comfortable with that. Things are going to change, and and you as the part of the leadership team of a startup have to be adaptable, and willing to be nimble enough to figure out the right path, because that path isn't going to be predictable. Nobody has ever forged that path ahead of you. You have to figure that out, and you have to be comfortable doing it and comfortable with the risks from a career perspective that come with it.
Whenever you said figure it out, that I reflected back. That was, I swear, my mom's favorite saying to me whenever I was growing up. And in the moment, I probably didn't appreciate it as much as I do reflecting back on it now. You have to have a certain mentality going into issues, especially like you were saying with working with one of these small companies, where you're just working toward problem solving and you're not just looking to everybody else or what does the procedure say I should be doing. So, yeah, interesting. Have you reflected back? Are you happy that you made the shift?
Yeah, I am. Certainly, there are moments where I think, oh man, that big structure would be nice to have. That would be nice to have right about now. There are certainly moments. It's cliche that a startup is the highest highs and the lowest lows, and that's certainly been true from my experience. And during those lowest lows, you think, oh, did I make the right decision? But looking back from a neutral perspective, not in one of the highest highs or lowest lows, it's something. The amount of change that our team has been able to bring to the industry, and what we've built from something that was a business plan that we in a very cliche way, drafted up in the Starbucks about a mile from my house, into what Cumulus is today. It doesn't the sense of accomplishment, and the learnings that have come with that are hard to beat. So I'm very glad I did it. I'm very glad I had the experience in the large companies that taught me a lot. But I'm glad I made the decisions that we did.
I'm sure that listening, people are going to rush out and they're going to start up their own companies, thinking about just how great you're making it sound with all of the potential risk, but also just high risk, high reward, right? As you're saying, the lowest lows and the highest highs. So that's great. So going from working in an organization like Shell, and kind of seeing how they work inside, and now working with one of these smaller organizations that directly services a company like Shell. What is it like being in this kind of David versus Goliath situation with working with these larger companies and with having that insider's perspective and now outsider's perspective? What can these companies do in order to kind of help themselves?
Uh, it's definitely a challenge. It is, and probably the biggest challenge I think is the difference in operating tempos of the two types of organizations. They're just operating at such different speeds that it kind of sometimes makes it hard to bring those gears together because the large organization is on annual budgets and thinking in terms of years. That's how it thinks. And then a startup is thinking in terms of weeks, quarters, and needs things to happen in order to hit certain funding milestones or whatever it might be, well within that OODA loop of the large organization, and that's probably the most difficult thing to manage expectations and plan your business so that it can align because there's really not much you can do to make that big organization move faster. I mean, it's a big whale swimming through the ocean, and you're a small little dolphin trying to get its attention. But having some knowledge, having been inside the whale, so to speak, you understand how people are motivated, how planning is done, and you can try to align your business that way. But that's probably the most difficult thing is just the expectations of speed and what's fast for one type of organization versus another, and also just what's even possible within a big organization. Even if somebody wants to move quickly, sometimes it's just not possible, and you have to expect that.
Now, you name dropped something real fast and just kind of glossed over it, but to circle back a little bit, you said OODA loop. Could you explain that a little bit?
In all these industries, you use acronyms and don't even think about it, and you have to learn not to. OODA loop is short for observe, orient, decide, act, and it was actually something that was first developed by the Air Force to teach fighter pilots how to think and how to make decisions. And the idea of getting inside your opponent's OODA loop means making informed decisions faster than your opponent. And you can imagine how that works in a dogfight with two fighter planes. But that's since been expanded to apply to all sorts of competitive situations. Here's an example. One of the first times we deployed the technology was during a project turnaround at a facility in Singapore. And it turns out one of the teams that was using the technology that was working on the project, they were not lubricating the joints properly, and it was discovered that they hadn't been properly trained. Now, without a technology like Cumulus, there would have been no real way to tell with certainty which piping connections that team had worked on. So the standard remedy would have been just to go and redo all the piping connections, relubricate everything, just in case one of the piping connections were one of the ones that team worked on. But with using our system, we were able to very easily look up, all right, these are the series of bolted joints that this team worked on. Only go apply corrective action to those particular bolted joints, saving hours and hours and hours of labor time during that project, all helping the management team just make better decisions and take actions that are more effective with better information.
Yeah, there's something we talk about a lot in construction quality, which is risk-based inspection, which by the sounds of it, using your system and kind of shrinking that OODA loop, you kind of take that to a whole new level by being able to point not just at kind of a generic area, but specifically at the areas that have the problem. So I can see how it is that is totally valuable and saves a good amount of time and money.
Yeah, exactly. A risk-based inspection takes you part of the way there because it looks at the type of work that commonly results in problems, and you focus your inspections on that type of work, but without any evidence that there actually is a problem or not. It's really just based on historical data. Now, you're absolutely right. This takes it just that one step further by not only looking at areas that have a high risk of failures, but using technology to detect that there actually has been a problem.
Matt, we're running up short on time here, and we just have a few rapid fire questions, just kind of get to know you a little bit more, rather than just Matt the CEO, but who Matt the person is. So I'm going to ask just a few short questions, and first thing that pops in your mind, just let me know. All right?
Let's do it.
So when you need to get motivated, you want to get real pumped up, what song do you turn to?
I turn to the song "Give Me Some Lovin'" by the Spencer Davis Group.
Where's your favorite place where you've traveled?
Probably Alaska. I went there 4 years ago now on a family vacation, and I love the outdoors and nature, and it was just an incredible trip.
Cats or dogs?
While I respect cats, I love dogs, and I am definitely a dog person.
What is not to love? What is one word that best describes you?
I say driven.
What is your favorite quote?
Favorite quote is this has been alternatively ascribed to Thomas Paine and General Patton. There's a little bit of a debate, but it's lead, follow, or get out of the way. You could choose one of those three. You could be a leader, which is great, be a follower, but don't be someone who just stands in the way.
If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, living or dead, who would it be?
Now, it's not a famous person, but it's my grandfather, who his name was Stanley Kleiman, and we were very close growing up, but he passed away much too early when I was in college, and I would just love to have dinner with him and introduce him to my family and talk to him about all the things that have been going on in the 20 plus years since I last spoke with him.
That sounds like a very pleasant dinner. I'm sure that he would be very proud of the man that you became, but not at all surprised. Matt, I have appreciated the conversation and the time that you gave. I hope to chat again soon.
Great to be here, Wes. Thanks a lot.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this episode of the Work Done Right podcast. Please help us out by subscribing and leaving us a review. And as always, our show notes are linked in this episode's description. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.